Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about images that are inspired by texture. I know we've been going over the whole series with the different inspirations for the photographs that I create and how they kind of shape the idea and feed me the inspiration I need to make these images. But today we're going to really focus on texture because texture is a big one as well. And like I've mentioned in previous videos, at the end of the day, it's the combination of all these different inspirations that make for a very strong image, and not just one. So it's being able to layer these different ideas in one image will just ultimately make for a stronger image. Okay, so this one, I'm going to start with this image. This image was taken in Alexandria, Virginia, at a venue. I forget the name of the venue, but it's one of these historical venues that people usually shoot at when they either get married in Alexandria or are doing an engagement session. This image was made with a 20 millimeter lens, and it's one that was inspired by light and texture. Because when you look at this image, you see the texture from the tree, and the interesting light that is hitting that texture. So it's a combination of both things. But ultimately, I think what drew my attention to this specific scene was the way the shrubbery looked and the fact that it's all green, and there are no other distractions, no other colors. It's just a nice shadow and light and shadow and nice green shrubbery with interesting patterns. And generally, I like to keep things very simple in my images. Like, minimalism is something that I practice, and the elimination of distractions is also something that I practice because at the end of the day, it kind of keeps the viewer's attention on what's important, the subject and the clean background. This is the first example of an image that is inspired by texture. Like I said, I used a 20 millimeter lens, and I had the couple stand in a nice little area in the scene where they're not fully engulfed by the leaves, but it's a nice wrap. It wraps around them pretty decently. So they're kind of, it's not just a backdrop, but they're part of the scene. And I use the lens to kind of also stretch the perspective, have things looking a little bit more grandiose than they might have actually been originally. And the interesting light also, I think, adds a really nice touch to the image, because you don't have anything competing with them in the background. You don't see maybe the wall that was there, or the random plants that are in the background. You just see the nice color green and them popping off the background in this little mystery space that they're in. And that's one of the things I like, is being able to create something mysterious that if you were actually standing in the location, you wouldn't necessarily see. Just something to give it a little bit of a editorial special feel to it, versus documentary where it's like what you see is what you get. So yeah, that's the first one. So this image was an engagement session in Alexandria, funnily enough. Back then I used to shoot there quite often. Being a photographer is really being a problem solver, right? And if you have a certain mindset about the kind of images you want to make, you're usually surrounded with issues, with problems that you need to solve, because the world is not minimalist. The world is not a clean backdrop. The world is filled with distractions, people, buildings, trees, cars, parked cars, you name it. They're all there in the backdrop. So by adopting a minimalist approach to image creation, you inherently create a problem. And the problem is, how do you get rid of all the distractions of the world? Part of the idea is I try to create a studio-esque feel, like a set feel from the natural world. Like, I think that's essentially how a good way to describe the elimination of distractions, because in the studio there are essentially no distractions, because it's a production, it's a set that you create to have everything you want in it, right? You don't have random people walking by, behind the backdrop. You don't have a parked car behind the backdrop, you know, or in the backdrop. So I try to, create a very intentional scene from the natural environment that isn't minimalist. So in this part of Alexandria, it's, they have it's cobblestone roads. They're like parked cars everywhere, houses next door, right across around the couple. There are houses everywhere. My approach generally is, what can I do to find a clean slate, right? And I look up, I look to the left, I look to the right, and I always look down. And in this case, I found this cobblestones, the floor, to be the best backdrop. So having identified this floor as the backdrop of choice, I now create a pose with the couple to allow me to use the backdrop as, the floor as the backdrop, because you can't necessarily have them standing up if you have legs cut off, like the rest of your body be chopped off if they were standing. So I'm like, okay, since I've selected the ground as my backdrop, I have to now structure everything around that ground to make an image that's interesting. So, as you can see, the texture is really interesting. There are no distractions, there are no random things, that it's all cobblestone, right? And I have the couple sit on the floor, and I have them like really embrace themselves in an interesting way. And again, I'm using my 20 millimeter lens, wide angle. I lift it above my head and tilt it down so I can just get only the ground and nothing else in the scene. I use this lens because, it really pushes the couple further back. So I'm actually standing in front of them, but because it's a wide angle lens, it's able to push them back and, give you a little bit more perspective. You get to see more of the scene. And, that makes it a little bit more grandiose in my opinion. And that's how I make this image. But and as you will see throughout this series, these are just things that you can apply in different locations. And I've shown it in like other ways where maybe it's a shape on the ground that I want, but this time it was the texture of the ground, and I just apply these in different locations. This is another wedding in Alexandria, Virginia. Again, it's crazy. So I'm like in a holding room with the bride, and I'm supposed to do portraits of her, but it's in the church. And these are one of these separators, like they're separators between rooms, so you kind of slide them and they collapse into each other. And it's a really busy room. There are people everywhere, the chairs, random stuff, storage, things that they stored from the church. And I want to do a session. I want to do a portrait session with her, but I don't have any time. Like, we're not able to go out because the guests have started arriving. The surrounding areas are not necessarily pretty, or have all the elements that I generally like. So we're not even able to go out. Even if I could, figure out something out there, we're not able to go out at this point. So I'm stuck in this room where I have to create interesting stuff, but everything is messy. It's just stuff everywhere. And there's nothing really exciting beyond this wall that has interesting texture. And the texture comes from the parts where it can fold. Like, it could collapse into each other and you just slide it and it collapses, but when you are able to isolate certain things in the scene and remove little elements from the thing that shows its true form, like, no one necessarily knows what that backdrop is. They don't know what it is. And the fact that I used a tilt shift lens adds a little bit of mystery and flair to that backdrop, but you have no idea what it is, because you don't see a handle or a rail or a slide. It's just strategically placed where I use the best elements or the best parts of it, which is its color and texture, and I insert it into the frame where I need it to be to create something that looks extremely intentional. And that's, again, another way to, these are just the tools, in my toolbox that I pull out when I need to solve a problem. And being able to isolate the backdrop, keep it clean, and just use the parts of it that actually help your image is a really good thing to have in your pocket. So yeah, I have quite a few images in this series, because it's very little to talk about other than tell the backstory and tell how the approach. But I have like 11 images to talk through, 11 or so. But let's keep it going. All right, so this one I wanted to include because it's a detail shot, and there are several reasons. I figured, I don't show a lot of detailed images, but I figured this was a good one to talk about how it fits into texture, and how it's kind of inspired a few things about this image. So I have these shoes for the bride. This was another wedding in DC. This one was in DC though, and she had these interesting shoes with feathers, wings on the back, and I'm the whole time I'm looking for something to do with them. I couldn't quite figure out something interesting, and I found the pattern on the wall. The arrows pointing up, right? And when you look at it, right, like when you with the way the shoes are posed, or the way the shoes are placed or arranged, you see how they also like have that arrow directional. Basically, the shoes look like they're pointing up too as well. So that those arrows kind of like inspired the placement of the shoes and the idea to place the shoes exactly where I placed them. It's like, let's follow the arrow, point upwards, follow the arrow. So I literally duplicated that idea. And had the wall not been there, with the texture, I guess you would call it, the wallpaper that with this directional wallpaper, I wouldn't have made this shot, because that was the inspiration. That's what gave me this idea to position the shoes this way. So yeah, this is just another one, a quick example of a detailed shot that texture of the environment inspired. This was a wedding in DC. I'm in downtown DC, where a bunch of clubs are. I think it's K Street or something. I forget the street, but very busy street. Lots of stuff going on around there. And, the whole time, again, like I said, my approach, I'm always looking for ways to minimize distractions, even in the city, with bright lights. And I always want things to be very intentional and just not have random stuff in the backdrop. This is just how I approach all my photography, the gift and the curse. And, the whole time I'm looking, what wall can I use? What can I use? And I just see the tree, and I look up, and the tree's actually has this pretty lit up too. Like, there are lights that are reflecting on it and stuff. This is at night, by the way, if it's not obvious, the night photo. And I was like, you know what? I pulled out my 20 millimeter lens again, and posed a couple, got really low. I know that I could exaggerate the image with that lens because I'm used to using it for images like this, and it stretches everything out. And I got this image. I mean, the couple were lit with the video light, if I recall correctly. We had a video light on them, and the scene was just the scene. It's the tree was as bright as, I guess, I didn't do any manipulation to the tree. I think it was just that bright. It had lights from the building on the other side reflecting on it, and it probably even had lights in it. I'm not sure. I don't really see any now, but and I guess my ISO performance was pretty good too to brighten up everything. But yeah, I made this photo and used the tree to obscure everything else, and just focused on that backdrop, filling the tree with the frame and keeping everything uniform and interesting. So yeah, this is just another example of that. This is just another image that shows the need to eliminate distractions in a very busy location, and using, the floor and also the leading lines from the floor. So the texture on the floor was like, automatically, I knew I had to make something using that because it's a really clean, interesting texture. And the lighting too was really good in this location. So I got up on, there are like benches and stuff next to, like at the corner of the pier. So I got up on that. I had them backlit. And I stood up and raised my 20 millimeter lens again above their heads to give make everything dramatic. And use that to make these photographs. So again, another example of using textures off the floor. I think it's good to show multiple images so one can see how these themes reoccur and how they're used in different places and how they feel different every time, because it's a different pose with the couple, it's a different texture on the floor, different lighting. They all do something different. So yeah, this is another one. This is one created in Baltimore Harbor. I think this is the aquarium, part of the aquarium, the outside of the aquarium. A lot of images have been made here by people, other people. But it's one that I just wanted to show because of how it inspired. It's almost it's shapes, right? It's shapes, it's color, it's texture. It has really interesting textures. So, I might a few of those things, or if not all of those things, inspired it. But for the purpose of this video, the texture and the color was what called me to this location. I love the gray wall. I love the red, and I love the lines of the red. Like, it's all interesting stuff. It's just another one where, the texture is really good, and it's part of, a big part of what's made me make this image here. So we all shoot against brick walls. That's something we do. The brick and the difference in lighting, the shapes that I'm able to make with this texture, some of the things, and also using the tilt shift lens in this particular shot. And sometimes I try to think, how can I best communicate my thoughts on how to try things, try stuff, right? Like, sure, the texture called my attention to this spot. I love the brick walls. A lot of us make pictures on the brick walls, but like that's not just it, right? You have to think, okay, I love the texture. Okay, now how do I find interesting light? Or is there interesting light present? Are there things I can play with shapes and shadows? So the texture might call you to the space, but when you're there, what else can you add to that image beyond just a nice textured wall behind them? What can you do with geometry? What can you do with light? What can you do with the choice of lens that you pick? So in this image, I am working with a lot of things beyond just a nice brick wall. I'm working with the different colors of the wall. So the shaded, the one in harsh light, or the one in light and the one in the shadow. They're correcting. Because of that, I'm able to create shapes. The two different shades of orange. I'm able to create something using the features of, the tilt shift lens. I'm able to create something interesting with the nice transitional focus on the lens. And I think there is no formula for just trying to do things differently or trying things interestingly. Just try. Like, once you try stuff, if it turns out good, you start to build a little bit more confidence in trying other things, right? Like, I don't think you can go on Pinterest and to learn to be creative or to think different. You just have to try shit. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But at least you tried. So, my goal has always been to create something that looks different from the next person. And as a result, I keep trying stuff and I play with my own things that I find interesting. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But once it works, I kind of can take these similar concepts to different spaces and try something different there. And because it's a different space, it works. And when it does work, it looks good. So yeah, that's, I think, ultimately is the thing, is these are all different approaches, different concepts, but applying them and just trying new things, trying to be unique, trying to be different. Sometimes you arrive on images that are uniquely yours and, will strike chords with some people and not, but at the end of the day, whoever likes your work and they will come to you for your work. So here, another example of the brick wall, but I layered it with another texture. It's still very smooth, very clean, no distractions. I have the the layer tree in the foreground just to give some dimension, so it's not a completely flat image. And the colors work well together. The subjects look good. The lighting is good. They pop off the brick wall, but it's clean. It has some green. It's not boring. It's not, and there are no distractions. So I included this one just to show a different brick wall image. But again, how the texture is what is calling my attention and creating the inspiration. And it's shot slightly on a diagonal just to give it a little bit of movement. And framed really well. Framed really well. So it's just another example. All right, so this image, I think I've shown this one before too, somewhere, but I want to talk about it again. So there are many things going on in this image. But I do know for sure that the reason this image exists is because of the texture. Okay, so I'm shooting in National Harbor. We're in a hotel or another venue or something, restaurant, something like that. And me and the couple and I are walking around the building to kind of find different spots to shoot, right? And we're walking, and I walk past the bathroom. So this is the bathroom, right? I walk past the bathroom, and the wallpaper catches my eye. It's bright. It has these lines. It's interesting looking wallpaper. So I stop, and I'm like, wait, you guys go into the bathroom. Thank goodness I have couples who are totally understanding of my process, and they just go with the flow. I'm like, yeah, you guys go into the bathroom. And what's interesting about this, so once I get into the bathroom, I realize that there's a dip, right? So in the wall, just so you guys understand it better, the groom and the bride are standing on against two different walls, right? They're basically standing on two different walls that are still connected, but just not the same. They're not on the same plane. So with the tilt shift lens, I'm able to focus on different planes. So his face is in focus, her face is in focus, but she's further back. And the texture on the wall allows them to blend in to seem like it's one wall. But the point is, the texture is why I shot against that wall. But once I went in there and discovered how things look different, I was able to come up with something else beyond just them standing against a textured wall. I'm able to now play with the tilt shift lens and play with different focal planes, and come up with an interesting pose and come up with this image that makes it look like she's smaller than he is, like completely tiny. But that's just having fun and playing with the images. So yeah, that's another one that is originally inspired by texture, but also has grown into something completely different. So here, we're also in Alexandria again, and we're walking around, and we find these this fence with interesting planks, and I like the way the light is bouncing off the planks. Light shadow, like creating lines that kind of match her outfit. But also the lighting, the direction of the light is interesting here. So I'm able to pose them two different focal planes, kind of like what I did initially in the other image, but they're basically, there is no dip in this wall. And I'm not using the tilt shift lens, but I staggered the couple and had the light hit them differently or hit them separately, but half the face, creating that whole half shadow, half light on their face. And I made this image. But again, this image has a little bit more than just interesting texture in the background. That is the original reason that the image is made. However, once that's set up, the lighting and other things, you start to adjust and to create something a little bit more interesting beyond just having a couple standing in front of a textured wall. It just at least eliminates any other additional distractions that would have been there if I had not used the wall to begin with. All right, guys, so this is the final image. I hope this conversation on texture was helpful and interesting. I think if you guys start to actually look for textured walls that are interesting, backgrounds that are interesting, and being able to just keep the background clean and have no random thing in there and just have your couples in front of them, you will see how much more it improves the images you make, even if everything else stays the same. but just being able to identify clean backdrops and have them framed properly and have your couples posed in there, you would notice how much better your images will look, um, even if the light isn't that great. But once you're able to get used to identifying these backdrops and then working on interesting light and interesting poses and things like that, then it takes your images to the next level. But just at least start with textured backdrops. Start with that. Then you can start working with shapes and working with leading lines and working with other elements. But just start with plain, clean textured backdrops and see how it changes your outdoor imagery. Because it's almost like mimicking a studio, but just finding the backdrops outdoors. Yeah. So hope this was helpful. I say this all the time, but you guys never give me feedback. I ask for things that you guys want to hear specifically. And, it helps me create videos that will be helpful for you guys versus just saying the things I think. But I look forward to you guys giving me feedback. I really am interested to hear what you have to say. So, hope this was helpful. See you guys on the next one. Thanks. Bye.